got done watching the video 7 Clever Atheist Flawless Victories, where Sam Harris gives this eloquent statement that you have to agree with. And it's miracles are not good enough. And he's implying that the miracles of Jesus, or the miracles presented of Jesus, are not good enough to prove that he is God. And that statement is so powerful. I mean, atheists have to jump on board and agree with it. They just wholeheartedly endorse it. And this might be surprising, but Christians have to agree with this statement as well. Well, he goes on to say that, the miracles of Jesus, I want you to consider this. Today, there is a guy alive, and this video was made several years back, but there's a guy alive by the name of Satya Sai Baba, who is claiming to be God on earth, and by the accounts of thousands and thousands of testimonies, that this man is actually doing miracles in our day and age. And so he continues that by saying that that's so important that we don't even give it an hour of TV time on cable television. So Sam leads us there to believe that these miracles that are occurring at Satya Sai Baba's hand under his hand, and you can check these out on YouTube. I didn't find them too impressive, but he looks at this and he's like, you see, this is not even worth our mentioning. But what's really curious about that is he gives credit to the modern scientific mindset. This is the way Sam Harris sees things, and this is the way he sees culture. And so he's like, we didn't give these miracles in the Hindu culture any second glances because, we just know better. And that's why we didn't give that an hour of TV time. But, sometimes we have to get outside of our own mindset and actually look at the culture that you're in and go, hey, wait a minute, this is a Christian culture, and studying about Hinduism, who cares? Excuse me. So, who cares about studying Hinduism in a Christian culture? Why would we ever focus on their God or gods when we have our own? Maybe that's the reason it didn't get an hour of playtime on cable television then. But Sam uses that to kind of guide us. But he goes on to say these, and he didn't say supposed miracles, but these miracles of Jesus were recorded decades and decades later. And I don't know how many times we're going to have to defend this and point out the obvious. Let's just point out the obvious. Old people can record things that were young occurrences in their life or happened when they were younger. So if the apostles recorded things in their 70s or 80s, or maybe in John's case in his 90s, who cares if it was recorded decades and decades later? That is stretching the truth, and it's just kind of deceiving and dishonest. I mean, wow, why do that? And then he's like, well, and copies of copies of copies. We've got copies of copies of copies of the Greek. And he's, trying to point in this idea that in all of these copies of copies, error most likely has crept in, and we can't, trust these original stories, and we can't trace all this down. And that is always the focus of atheist or skeptic attack is, let's look at the errors, But let's step back for a minute and think, what is one of the best ways to make sure that you remember something? Write it down, record it. So during that time period, were they using their absolute best means of remembering something to write things down and to make copies? And as he's stating, copies of copies of copies. That's one of the reasons that a lot of Christians are very confident in the Bible is we've got so many copies that when you compare them all together, you can see what the original looked like very simply. So he says, do you see any problem with people basing their lives around these miracles of Jesus, when these miracles aren't good enough? And he says, do you see any problem with half the world organizing basically their life around this? Well, what he is proposing here is that this is dated, it's fake, it's no good, etc. So we've let us smart individuals and smart types create a better future and better tomorrow. But what's really curious about that is the smart types and the smart individuals, with the ideas they come up with, We actually test those ideas out and find them failing terribly so. I mean, communism is a failed thing. Socialism fails in country after country, year after year, as it degrades into communism. And it's one of the reasons, like, why you look around the world and you see these communist countries and these socialist countries kind of creeping back towards a, pseudo-capitalistic mindset. I mean, why does China care at all about buying and selling, when they're communist? Well, so I see a problem more so with Sam's logic, and I will get into this. When he says that miracles aren't good enough, he's actually kind of wrapping several things together. And so let's just look at this. Like, number one, he is saying that fake miracles aren't good enough to deceive people. Well, yeah, that makes sense, but that kind of gets rolled into his statement. He's giving a general synopsis, but he doesn't qualify it. He's just saying miracles are not good enough. Well, fake miracles are definitely not good enough. But on top of this, what's implied there is what we know is that miracles don't necessarily prove God. No, they don't. So if someone pops into existence right now in front of us and does a miracle and says, I'm God, that alone doesn't prove jack. We understand that. And you also, something that has to be thrown in there is someone could see a miracle and refuse to believe it. Take little children in sports, for instance. So many times they don't even see their own abilities. And by their mindset, something is totally impossible. And you say, hey, you can do this. I know you can pick that up and walk this far with it. Or I know you can tackle that person. Or I know you can run faster than that. I know you can do it. I know you've got it know you have it in you. And people often just refuse to believe, hey, that girl over there likes you. You should really go believe that there's going to be a great outcome there. And they refuse to believe things that are real because they have a free will to refuse to believe. And so somebody could see a real miracle and not be convinced it's not good enough. We understand that. So you've got to calculate all this in when you're saying miracles are not good enough. But let's just go with this broad consensus idea that they're not good enough. Miracles alone are not good enough. Do you think that might be why the Bible included prophecies before Jesus ever came on the scene by hundreds of years? So now you're combining impossible with impossible. It's pretty stellar. And then Jesus was willing to die for these impossible statements and claims. And then on top of that, Jesus offered a testable way. He said, why don't you follow me and find out? You want to get in this thing firsthand? I've got some metrics for you. And if you follow these, you make your own decision about whether these things work or not. But here's what kind of gets me too is Sam even familiar with the Bible? Like, does he understand that the Bible is very aware that miracles in themselves are not enough, and it never tries to make the miracles the only piece or the hinge point piece of everything, even though at times you can see that like the resurrection is the point of the Christian faith. But it's not just miracles alone. The Bible says that, like, test the spirits. Like, why would the New Testament say that going forward if it didn't think there might be more spirits to test? And why does it also say that there will be more false miracle workers to come? And when I mean false miracle, let's say false prophets that are able to do miracles. The Bible foretells that. And so if anything, Satya Sai Baba actually helps to confirm again that the Bible is true. It says there will be more that claim to be God. There are going to be more that show up and say, hey, I'm him, and they can do miracles. And so, yeah, miracles are not enough to prove that Jesus is the way, true, and life. You need more comprehensive groundwork than that. You need the full teaching and embodiment of the Christian faith. Well, as Sam is trying to make his point, he makes an explicit statement here, and I think this is where his cognitive dysfunction comes in. He makes this explicit statement. He's like, all of these things were, presented in the pre-scientific era. The point there is that, like the sheep are dumb. Like the average Joe is dumb and gullible. And especially before science came along and started explaining some of the, mysterious things like lasers and magnetism and maybe steam and power and explosions, whatever. Chemistry, how I can change a liquid into a solid, etc. Before science came along, men were really gullible at the mysterious things. But that point severely fails for a few reasons. You realize that the Bible actually includes skeptics within it. You see, there were skeptics in Jesus' time as clearly as there are today. Sam is obviously a skeptic of Satya Sai Baba and his miracles. And I don't care if Satya Sai Baba, that's cool, Bobble. I don't care if Bobble's miracles were genuine or fake. He's a false teacher, so I don't care. But he needs to understand that there are skeptics today. They were just like they're skeptics then. The Pharisees were skeptical of Jesus. They didn't want to believe him, but they eventually had to give up and go, you know what? Well, it's not about whether he can do miracles or not. It's about when he should do miracles. Or also, you've got historians around this time period like, oh, well, Jesus, he was a magician. And, while he was in Egypt, he must have learned those mystical arts, that magic stuff in Egypt. See, there was something pretty mysterious then happening in Egypt that the people of that time period knew about, that those things aren't quite explainable, that people wrestled with, and Jesus learned it. Like, the time frames there don't even work. If Jesus left as a child and came back as a very young child, how did he learn the mystical arts in Egypt? But that's actually what the historians of the time period were trying to say, because they were skeptical. They didn't believe. They didn't just believe that people could do miracles. They weren't falling for it. So just like there were skeptics now, there were skeptics then. So you can't just blame it on the pre-scientific era. Further, who did Jesus present his miracles to? Like, I really want you to think about this. If Jesus was real and presented his miracles, then he presented them to common people. Or if you want to say Jesus didn't really exist, which you'd have a hard time doing that. Jesus, the man we know existed. But he has his disciples around him, which we know existed as well. So you just have to deal with the fact of these men existing. But who were these people? They were very down-to-earth, hands-on, mechanical types. They didn't have their heads in the clouds. Now, if there is any kind of similarity between people today and people then, which there's all kind of similarities if you read ancient text and go through the ancient thinking of people, as you're like, oh, those thoughts. Okay, and that's where we get that from. I agree with that thought, Oh, he acted like that in that situation. He got jealous and all that kind of stuff of his wife sleeping around. Yeah, I'd get jealous too. Like, if there's any similarities between the way people think now and the way people think then we have some deep insight that these mechanical, hands-on, earthy types weren't easily fooled, just like they're not easily fooled today. So, for instance, if you go to a healing crusade by a well-known false prophet today, let's just say, I'm not going to say who or where or how, just fill in the blanks. So you've got this super healer prophet. And do you know who's there? Who are the people that are there? Who are the gullible types? I'd like you to analyze the crowd sometime. Is it electrical linemen? Are there hunters there? Are there soldiers in this crowd? Are there plumbers and framers, roofers, really earthy types? No. It's usually people that live more of a disjointed life. They're not really plugged into the reality around them. Kind of, maybe a security guard would be a good example. A security guard, all they do they just have to walk around and think and talk to people. They don't really have to get physically engaged. Maybe an accountant could get disconnected because he's dealing with, facts and figures all day. Maybe a social worker could be misled astray because all they're doing is sitting around talking to people. Maybe a salesman, that doesn't really ever engage with reality. All of those people and types could probably be pretty easily fooled. And I bet if you looked at the false prophets today and looked at their crowds, you'd see a lot of physically disconnected types. But that is not who Jesus presented himself to. Now, is it? No, he went to the earthy, salty types that would, if Jesus would have done a miracle, hey, how did you just do that? How did you just split those fish up? Like Jesus, you didn't have you weren't carrying a basket and you didn't go fishing this morning, and I haven't seen bread around you for 3 or 4 days except for the pieces we gave you, and I want you to eat those. So where are you coming up with all these bread and fish from? You see, there are some people that are very connected to reality, who are very in touch with it, and they're not easy to fool. And that's who Jesus presented himself to and said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men."